Hello guys, welcome back to part 2 of AE103 Sync'ing. Now before we get back to the original recording, going through the rest of the short film rushes and dealing with high frame rate material and action markers and interesting useful workflow stuff there, I wanted to demonstrate 3 other methods of syncing. This is something that I neglected to do in the original record and I should have put in. Because we all have the choice, right? So, we should explore all the different ways that, we can sync and let users have the options. Plus, this method that I've been using was relying on auto sequences, which is relying on time of day timecode. So if you didn't have that, you may use one of these other 3 methods that I'm about to show. Number 2, you'll use number 2. So let's take a look. First off, I will show you a method of syncing which I've seen commonly done, and I think it might actually be the more Avid approved method. Although it's not the one I would use, I'll show you anyway because we're all about choice. So if you get your pictures, so select those and do an Alt or Option drag into another bin. So if you do that for your sound and your picture, drag them into the same bin, select all, and do a right click AutoSync. Now we got a number of options in AutoSync, and we just want to make sure what we're syncing with. So definitely for source timecode is what we're going to want to do if you're using it this way. That's all we've really got to go off of. In points and out points is if you had manually placed markers on the source, on the sound side and the picture side, physically telling it what point to sync it to, which you can do, but you wouldn't batch do it that way, and that would take a long time. And auxiliary timecode, we get 5 auxiliary timecode channels where we can essentially batch manipulate timecode. This is really useful for some tasks where you want to copy timecode from one to another, but you don't want to edit its original timecode. You can put it into the auxiliary there. I actually use it for grouping. And we have waveform analysis, which we can't really do here because our source picture doesn't have any sound. So there's no waveform to compare to on the picture side. If your picture had guide audio, you could do that, but you'd be better off doing it on a timeline sort of pluralized type fashion, which is a feature on Avid now, rather than scanning all the clips individually. Now we can also give instructions here for what Avid should do once it's synced them and created subclips. So we can keep audio on clip with the video, so we can keep the audio that's on the video side. So if there was any guide audio, this is kind of grayed out for me here because it can tell that there isn't any. And generally speaking, if you're syncing to new sound audio, particularly for rushes sync, then you're not going to want that. You're going to want the synced proper sound. Now, there would be instances where that would be useful, otherwise the feature wouldn't be there, just not one I've used much. But if we jump down a bit, include audio from audio-only clips, and we can set a range, meaning we can basically choose which audio tracks end up on our subclips. So if you remember from earlier, from how we've been syncing the short film so far, I was only ever taking A1 because that was the mix track. So if I wanted to do that here, I would just set the range A1 to A1. So all the subclips will just have A1. And if there's multiple video tracks, A and Bs and stuff, when you're doing that, you can tell it to create group clips instead of a subclip. So this is a more automated way of doing it, and you'll see here, you'll get your subclips very quickly. There they are. That's all of our sync subclips essentially. And then all you would need to do is go through each one. You jump to the head of the slate, and you would check the slates one by one, and so if that one's fine, sync's fine, so then you would just jump back and rename it as per the slate, and then jump to the next one and do the same again. Now if you do this method, then as you're going through and you're checking them, when you're checking your slates, if you've got one that is out like this, you can right click on the clip, go to source settings, jump over to the audio tab, and then you can slip your audio here. But as far as I know, that this has run into issues with us when we've submitted EDLs and of audio timecode in the past. Another way to do this is if you had ticked the film checkbox when you were creating the Avid project, then you can use the audio perf slip keys in the command palette to slip the sound one perf at a time and realign it in sync. But it is a little bit fiddly, and it results in you creating subclips, in the bin and manipulating them in the bin rather than a timeline. Whereas I prefer to, although you would still do your dupe test and you could still check stuff there, I do prefer to have a timeline that I can go through of the day systematically and be checking the camera numbering going up as I'm going and all that kind of thing. And I feel like it sort of forces checks and watches. Plus, you're not doing a whole lot of constant, double clicks to open stuff. Next up is the method I would use to sync if I had no source time code and it was completely manual. I'm just going to call it day 2 manual sync. I'll grab my picture. I'll just drop them all on. And then what I would do is, before I drop my sound on, I would just check the number of tracks and see how many we have on these. So at most we're going to have 5 tracks. So I'm going to just add up to track 5. And then I've got a script that'll do this, but I'll just do it manually. I jump ahead to each edit and add an edit across all tracks. You'll see why in a second. So we're just going to jump to our first clip and find the clap. There's our clap there. First audio clip, find the clap.
Take 1, marker.
There it is. And then we'll show the secret to how we do this. So with the video deselected, I hit my replace edit key and boom, there we go. Nice and easy. Your replace edit key is this one right here. And I have it mapped on my keyboard right next to the other two. And what it's doing is it's sort of taking what's in your source monitor and editing it onto the timeline from that point outward. But it's sort of meant to be used for replacing takes and replacing shots. So if I hadn't put those edits, it would have refused to work because it has to fill the entire space that it's being edited into, so to speak. So by adding in those edits, I've given it like a small section to replace. It's replacing that little chunk on the timeline. So I'll show you again. I'll do just 2 or 3 slides.
2.
There it is. Again, this is the method that I would definitely use if I didn't have any time code to go off of. This is how I'd be syncing. And replace edit. Boom, then it appears.
Right, how long have I got?
Now this is sort of assuming that your sound started rolling before picture did and continued after picture cut. If in some instances that's not the case, it'll sort of just refuse to work. I'll show you, just try and replace it in a short clip here. Yeah, insufficient source material to make this edit. And then in that case, you can just manually edit it on and drag it across. So that is replace edit syncing. Right now, lastly, I'm going to try to quasi-demonstrate waveform syncing on the timeline. So this is a very popular method that used to be used by an application called Pluralize, which I think you can still use with Premiere, but not so much with Avid now. We're used to spit an AF timeline out of Avid, import it into Pluralize, and it would sync the timeline. It would build the sync map by matching the waveform audio of your sync sound to the waveform audio of the guide audio on the camera. It would spit out a new AF, you'd bring that back into Avid, and you'd have your sync map. Now, we have essentially that function in Avid now. Now, I can't really demonstrate it too much at the moment because I don't have any material with guide audio, like picture material with guide audio on it, but I will do it on a future video. But just to show you how you would go about it, is if you dropped all of your source picture on along with its audio tracks, so say your picture had 2 channels of audio, so we'll leave 2 channels for that, and then you dropped all of your sync sound below that, then what you do is just with everything selected, so come to the start, select all to the right, go to timeline, Waveform Sync. And then as soon as you select Waveform Sync, Avid will begin to sync and move everything around in the timeline to, sync it by the waveform. It's not a method I've used before. I must admit I'm not really a fan of things being too automatic. I would rather just get really good at it and do it manually, because I trust myself more than... It's not that I trust myself more than software or computers, but I think it can lead to you getting a little bit lazy. But that's me speaking from long form workflows, so for drama and for scripted content. If you were on a reality show or a documentary or something where you're getting mass amounts of material, every day that you have to choose through, this could be absolutely invaluable. Or even stuff where you've been given sync sound, but you don't have slates, like GoPros. On films, camera crews are notorious for forgetting to slate the GoPro. Like sometimes for an action scene, not necessarily GoPros, but action cams or things like that, they'll set them up at all kinds of weird angles, but they won't have a slate or a visual sync ref, but they'll want them multicam grouped into your Alexa or your main cameras. And so yes, this could be your answer. So guys, thank you for watching. I will now let you get back to the original part 2 video that was recorded. Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of syncing material. If you haven't watched part 1, I would highly recommend going back and watching through part 1, because I'm syncing through all the rushes of a short film, The Treasure, one that I worked on before. And we're about halfway through it at this point. I'm going to continue on. Now I can say that what I go into in part 2 that I didn't cover in part 1 is how I would handle respeeds that have audio, so retiming stuff to fit synced sound, adding action markers after I've done, and then like a bunch of little notes of stuff that sort of just comes up as you're syncing, that I couldn't really plan for. That's why I did it this way. So thank you for coming back for part 2. Hope you enjoy it, hope you get something out of it, as always. And yeah, let's pick up from where we left off last time. Right, so that's our standard frame rate material synced for day 1. But now we're going to go back into the high frame rate material. Now this is something that you're also looking out for as you're going through the timeline, as you're making your sync subclips. You should always be taking a look at these numbers, because most camera file systems will use numeric naming. I'm quite a fan of arrays and reds. They're very nice and standardized and make sense. So that you'll generally have your real, which will be, for example, on your A cam, it'll be A001. And then later in the file name you'll have clip number, so like C001. So you're expecting the C001 to be going incrementally up. If it ever skips a number, then there should be a file there. There's a file missing and you'll need to chase that down. If you've went back and you've checked all your transcodes that you were supplied by DIT and that number isn't there, that's a problem. You need to find it and ask someone. 16, take 1. And we're shot at 120 FPS. Right, so now we've got everything synced from day 1, we can now do our chip test of day 01 chip test. scroll through. Oh, there's one there that was missed. And this is why we do our dupe test. And also how when you're trying to present to camera as well as sync at the same time, you can miss stuff. So there I've went back, subclipped it out, made my synced subclip, and then just to be 100% sure, I'll add that into my dupe test. Doesn't need to be exactly where it would fall. Just put it in there. And if I go to end, it's now all yellow, so it's accounted for. Right now, day 3 is the biggest shoot day of this short film. As you can see here, when I'll quickly put together the sync map, got a lot of stuff going on there. But it does look like everything is sync material. All of our picture and our audio are lining up with what looks to be a few well tracks or things in there. That's a car engine noise. Well, I don't think I'm going to chat about this one too much. I'm going to sync it, but I'm going to go through this one myself as quick as I can. As you can see, I've had to make a new workspace because I'm not at home, I don't have my other monitor, and I'm doing this just on a 15-inch MacBook screen, and I needed the screen real estate. Here's another little tidbit. You can see here, I've just subbed out this one, that over here the picture started recording before the sound, so I'm not going to be able to do my usual just mark the picture, then turn on A1 and subclip, because I'll get a little bit of the previous one. So in that case, what I would do is I'd just grab these, both the picture and sound, because they're in sync together, and just move it over, out the way. Because as I've said before, you can only have one sound file on your synced subclip. Whew! And there's day 3 synced. That one took a little bit longer, but you know, still probably not as long as if I was to do an actual shoot day on a production that I'm working on, because it'd probably be at least as long as that, but on 2 cameras. But that was a fair hefty amount in multiple scenes, multiple big scenes. But none of the other shoot days came close to that on this particular production, so we've done the big one. Further highlighting my colouring scheme, this one is purple. Scene 7 is just Martha. So all of scene 7 can be pink. 12 and 15 are also just Martha. 18 is then back together again. So we got purple. And you'll see how that plays in later on the timeline. But if you've watched my, ways to use colouring in Avid video, you'll already know where I'm going with this. And on to day 4. Another thing to watch out for sometimes, depending on what the action is in the scene, you've got to watch out for other similar sounding claps next to the clapperboard. It should be fairly easy to tell if you listen to the area and you hear the call, but sometimes these can happen within a few frames of each other. So in this case, we have an actor hitting a baseball bat into his hand as they lead up to the scene, like he's already beginning his pre-scene action before the call action. And if that happens within about 5 frames of your clapperboard, you could get, there's the potential for that to be confused with the clap, so you just need to be aware of that. I mean, in this case, it didn't sound too much like it, but I have heard them sound very similar sometimes. By the way, if you don't have a client monitor, and even making your monitor a bit bigger, as I have done for this syncing workspace like this, isn't big enough, you can map to your keys to zoom in or what is it Avid calls it again? Reduce and enlarge, that's what Avid calls it. So I've got these mapped to my A and S keys, and so then if I wanted to make sure the slate, if it's far away like that, you can zoom in, and then if you hold Command and Option, or Control Option on Windows, then you can click and drag to recenter around the slate once you've zoomed in. If you need to, that is. But for some ones like this, on this, I have had to. Right, so here we're right at the very end of the last day. We're getting into some of the stuff we talked about earlier when we were doing shoot day 1, which is high frame rate material that does have sync sound. So I'm going to show you how I would sub that out and how I would make the respeeds which have the audio on them as well. So there'll be 2 versions for each of these clips. So just so as you know, generally speaking, on the continuity notes and on the slate, usually you would have a note of the frame rate that they've shot at, you know, whether it's 48 frames, 120, whatever. That would generally be noted there. It's not noted here, but like I said, I do have notes from when I did sync this up when I was initially working on it. So I'm pretty sure, as long as my notes are right, that this is a shot at 48 frames. So I should be able to go off of that. So I would initially sub these all out without the audio on them. Right, so at this point, I have everything sub-clipped out for day 4. I'm going to do my dupe test before I do my respeeds. So I'll go day 4 dupe. Okay, our dupe test is all good. Close the picture. And now for these respeeds. So what I'm going to do with them is make a new sequence called day 4 respeeds. And I'll drop these all on. There they are. And then these are all 48 frames. We're on a 24 frame timecode base, so these are all going to need to be 200% speed. So just doubled. So I'll just go to my effect palette. I'll grab a time warp. I have this as a template, but I'm just showing you how you'd make it. So once you're throwing time warp on there, just open up in Motion Effect Editor, which can be found under Tools. There, got it mapped to a key. And then as long as there's a time warp effect on there, click this here to bring up your speed graph. And then this is a graph where we can control and make all of our respeeds. So we can add keyframes here and set different speeds at different times. We can do all sorts of things here. But for now, all we want to do is change the speed to 200%. Boom, that's that doubled. Now, I'm just going to go back to my bin and drag this out. And then I have that as a template there, which I can go select right to select all the rest of the clips. And then if I hold Command or hold Control if you're on Windows, and then double click this effect, it'll apply to all of the selected clips in the timeline. And this will work with any effect, any preset, whether it's a 3D warp, resize, paint effect, color correction, whatever. Any effect you've dragged into the bin, you can batch apply it to clips on your timeline using this method. Right, so now I have normal speed playing clips. So now I'm just going through as normal. I'm looking for the clap. It's a real shame they haven't used a torch on the slate here. That would have been helpful. Now the only ones that we can actually really sync here are these last 4 because they have a clapper board on them. These ones here have no visual sync ref, they have no dialogue, there's not really, I mean you could try and use his footsteps, but you need to isolate which sound file and which footstep it was. It would be really difficult. So I will still make resped versions in case we want to use him running in the middle of the night like that at normal speed, but I'm not going to bother trying to sync the sound if it's that impossible. So I'm just going to jump straight to the first one that I can sync, which is this first one here that has a clapper board. The clap. There it is. Now I've got the sound file loaded up here. I've just dragged up the sound auto sequence, and I'm going to cut them in from there. You could easily just load up the sound files and do it that way, but I'm going to do it this way because it helped me to track and find where these begin by going to the same point as was on our sync map and where these resped clips started in the day. So it just helped me to isolate them, but you could quite easily do this with the source sound files. That's the clap there. So I've got the clap there, got the clap here, and I'm just going to cut that in like that. And then I'll just stretch it back, and I'll do a little test play to make sure this looks right, because he runs up and he hits up against a tree.
Action.
Nice. That looks about right. So then I'll just mark, and I will only sub where the sound is. Because when you've applied a respeed like this, Avid will keep the duration on the timeline the same, but from from halfway through, because this is double speed, it's just going to repeat the last frame. And that's going to be not a lot of use to us, and you don't want to be scrolling through that. So, but it can be hard to isolate that moment every time. I mean, you could if you wanted to spend the time doing that, but generally speaking, I'll just mark where the sound goes up to and then sub from there. So this was 16E take 1. So I'll just call that 16E take 1 RS. RS for respeed, and then they know that that's, you know, real-time playback speed. So I'm going to go through and do that for all the rest of them now, and you can see the process. Right, so that's my respeeds that have audio subbed out. I'm just going to go back over and do the ones that don't have audio. It may seem like I'm doing this in a weird order, it's just how I've presented it. Generally speaking, I would go through, lay all the sound in and sync it, and then go through and sub-clip them all as well. But when you're trying to do this for camera, it can be a bit more tricky. And so now, just the same as before, I'll select all those and do a right click, AutoSync. And now we've got resped clips that we can watch down. That respeed, as I recall, did actually make it into the final cut. Right, now that's as I've gone through, we've synced everything, we've got our sync subclips for the entire movie. Go us. Now, at this stage, I will just add one thing before I would start prepping scene bins, which we'll do in next module. I would go through all of these clips after they're synced and just listen out for the action call.
Action.
And then I'd add a marker. Now, I'd never like to use red markers. To me, red always denotes a problem, so I kind of try to avoid red if possible, especially colouring clips. Only a monster, an absolute monster, would colour clips red. I've had to rebuild my settings recently, so I normally have this mapped, and I didn't, so I'm going to put it back. Now, by default, whenever you add a marker, it brings up the marker window. A lot of the time when I'm adding markers, it's to denote action that doesn't need any text. So I'll use this little fast menu here and disable edit marker dialog when adding. so that I can just add it and it won't have that pop up. Now if I am adding a marker and I want to add a note, you can just double tap it, because if you hit add marker and there's already a marker there, it'll bring it up. So you can just double tap if you need to add a note. So yeah, adding a marker on action is very common practice and extremely useful for the editor, especially if as you're going through, maybe they reset it on the same row, they called action again, then you add another marker there. So that if the editor's watching down, they're reviewing the rushes, and then it's just a bunch of crew talking, and they're like, oh yeah, can we go again? And then they're not just fast forwarding through bloopers to get to the next action. They can just jump to your marker and skip all that. So it does take some time to go through and add these. In fact, it's probably the part that takes me the longest, easily, is to go through all of the clips and add the action marker, especially for something like this. You can see it was halfway through the clip where they actually called action. And it is something, again, where if you're trying to expedite it, if you have your waveforms on, and this is where you get to know what your first AD's voice sounds like, you can recognize the waveform with the certain way they call action, because they tend to have quite a rehearsed way of always saying it with the same tone and volume. And action, something like that. So you can look out for that. And then I generally play action, just to confirm, and add the marker immediately after action, so that they can jump to the marker and then play from there and use from there if need be. So yeah, that's something that you would do on every clip. Even if it's moss, even if there's no sound, you just look for where the action begins and add a marker. Very, very useful for your editor. They will thank you for it. But while I'm on the record, I'm not going to skim through and add markers on all of these. I'll just do this one scene here to show you how I would go about it. Having mapped to a key, by the way, the option to toggle source record in your timeline, that's exactly what it's called if you want to search for it, is extremely useful. For me at least, I use it constantly. So I will have waveforms enabled, audio data, waveforms, and that's not per track, that's just all waveforms. Because if you're doing it per track, you need to do it for each item that you load, whether it be a clip or a sequence. This, it will just always be displaying all waveforms at all times. And since all my subclips are only going to have one channel anyway, and it's not going to be a lot of audio, it's not a lot of processing for Avid to do. So I'll have that on, and I'll go through these and have the source in my timeline. And you can always tell which one you're in by the color of the playhead. If you're in the record monitor, it'll be blue. If you're in the source, it'll be green. So with these enabled,
and action.
There's action there. And then you skim through.
And one more time, keep it rolling.
Camera set.
Action.
Some good Irish swearing there.
Set.
Action.
Sure.
Action.
So you can see I can generally recognize the waveform of when he calls action, at least for the start. I'll add it and then I'll skim along and I'll look for any repetitions where they start and stop or go again.
Camera set.
Action. 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 Action.
And that's all the markers done for that scene. So that was fairly quick actually. I do remember it being fairly easy on this one. But yeah, that's something that you'll go through and you'll do generally on a per shoot day basis after you sync all your clips. It's the first thing you'll do is add your action markers. Because once you've got sync subclips and you've got your action markers, then you can put them into the scene bin for the editor, prep them how they like it laid out, and hand it over to them. And it's your ingest sync action markers that you want to try and expedite to be as fast as possible. Because quite often, depending on your editor, but even generally quite often, they're going to be waiting, at least at the beginning of the shoot, unless you get ahead of them, for footage. Because the producers might be waiting to see cuts, preliminary cuts of scenes. They might be sitting waiting for the editor to deliver stuff, and so then in turn the editor wants to get a cut done as quickly as possible and move on to the next scene, so they're waiting for you to prep the scene bins so they can start as soon as possible and get a jump. So if you can get these tasks nailed and practiced and as quick as possible, then your editor will be in a better position to take care of their priorities, which is the whole point in our role, we are the assistant editor, so we want to assist as much as possible. Right guys, that completes my coverage on syncing audio and video in Avid Media Composer as part of long-form workflows. Thank you very much for your time and for watching. This is definitely one of the key skills that, I know I've already said this probably in the intro and probably while I was syncing, but this is definitely one of the key skills to lock down and to get good at. It's not a very complicated thing, it's quite simple, but a lot of those simple tasks to do are the ones where people tend to get sloppy on. And if you can nail this 100% of the time with accuracy and with trustworthiness, then that can get you brought back onto jobs regularly as a second assist or ingesting. And then once editors trust you, you can come up to doing first assistant tasks and all kinds of other more exciting stuff. But it is definitely a very good skill to have locked down. And this is by no means the end of the AE100 series. There is definitely more coming up, like prepping the subclips and handing it over to the editor, how we would lay them out, doing online turnovers and exports to hand over to online, whether it be grade, sound, whatever, as well as some other little tidbits and effects and various other little skills that are really useful for an assistant to be able to have at the start. And if you haven't checked out my Patreon, you should know that I'm there now as well. So if you're over there, you can get these videos early. You can get access to more stuff that won't necessarily be technical, like factual, objective. It'll be more how I would solve a problem, how I would do it, my approach to things, as well as some downloadables every now and again as well. So I'll try to do about 1 or 2 of those a month. And those could be stuff like pre-made Avid effects or templates for projects or templates for spreadsheets that can be really useful in post, things like that. So if you haven't checked that out, the link will be down below. So feel free to go and check it out. If it's not your thing, it's not your thing. But if it's of interest, that's where you can go and take a look. But until next time, guys, seriously, thank you very much for watching. Live long and prosper. And I hope your projects are all treating you very well and you're happy and you're not getting too many notes. And yeah, I'll see you next time for the next video.